Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast proudly brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I am Iqbal Sevea, Director at the Institute. On today's episode, we are going to discuss the results of the recently concluded Indian elections. More than 642 million people voted in India's election, making it the largest electoral exercise in the world. The results have contradicted the exit polls that were unanimously pointing towards a landslide victory for the BJP. To be sure, the BJP has still emerged as the single largest party. It has won 240 seats. However, this is short of the 272 seats that are needed to form a government. The BJP looks set to return to power in a coalition government and as the dominant partner in the National Democratic Alliance. Meanwhile, the opposition India Alliance or India Coalition has won 232 seats, and the Indian National Congress is seen to have made a resurgence. Overall, India seems poised to return to the default setting of a coalition government. To discuss what happened and the politics that is yet to play out, I'm joined by my colleague, Dr Ronojoy Sen, Senior Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, and Dr Neelanjan Sircar, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Policy Research and currently Academic Visitor at the Institute of South Asian Studies. Neelanjan, Ronojoy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us here.
So I know you've been observing the elections and I suspect you've both been lacking in sleep over the last few days. So let me ask you a very broad question. How do you read these results?
So why don't I start? It's hard to come up with a general story, but I do think there's one national storyline worth thinking about. In 2014 and 2019, the last two national elections, there was a Modi wave. There was a national issue, anti-corruption, anti-incumbency against the Congress in 2014, and reposing faith in Prime Minister Modi. In 2019, it was conflict with Pakistan, it was Balakot, again, a national issue, reposing faith in Prime Minister Modi. This time, I think there was an imagination that Ram Mandir, right, the temple to Lord Ram that was built in Uttar Pradesh might be the issue. But it didn't materialize because it is not an issue that is only about Prime Minister Modi, right? It is an issue about the Hindu nationalist movement that goes beyond Prime Minister Modi. Now, without that kind of surge of support for Prime Minister Modi and the BJP around a national issue, certain regional issues started to matter much more. Now, two key factors here are worth mentioning. In the run-up to the election, we saw a huge amount of political centralization and also harassing of political opposition. Two standing chief ministers were jailed. The bank accounts of the Congress party were frozen. Now, people did see this and people did react to it. They may not use high-minded democratic language, but they'll say things like, we need to protect the Constitution. We're worried about the BJP washing machine, which is harassing of political opponents to engineer defection into the BJP. We're worried about federalism. But these are all pointing to the same fact, that there was some concern that the democratic fiber of the country, that certain red lines were being crossed on democracy. And I think that you saw the BJP take a hit really all across the country, except for the new states it broke into, because of this.
Right. I don't have too much to add to what Neelanjan said. But overall, I think there was a sense that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's charisma, attractiveness to voters, was fading somewhat compared to 2014 and 2019. So it could have been voter fatigue. It could have been if you sort of resort to Max Weber's famous idea of routinization of charisma. But I think after 10 years in power, there was that sense, and I did a little bit of traveling both in Uttar Pradesh and Bengal, and I did get a sense, just having watched some of his rallies, that there was the people present there were still turning up in fairly large numbers to see him, almost like darshan, but they were not really interested in the message. And B, I also found that his messaging, which he's very well known for, justifiably, was somewhat off. So from the second phase of the campaign onwards, we saw that in all these sort of the positive messaging, development, infrastructure, the stuff that the government had done over the last 5 or even 10 years, that seemed to sort of play second fiddle to a narrative that became far more, anti-minority, anti-Muslim, and oddly enough, dwelt a lot on the Congress manifesto and Congress promises, like maybe tempering inequality, and things like that on poverty. So it seemed like instead of sending out a message on BJP's behalf, he seemed to be very much caught up with what the Congress was trying to do, and which I found kind of odd, given that the BJP has always traditionally, the last 10 years, really run down Congress, hadn't given, So that was something that I found quite interesting during the campaign, and that I think had an impact most certainly on the results.
Both of you have highlighted the lack of the ability of the BJP to portray a larger narrative. You've also noted that how this election was different from the 2014 and 2019 election, and is much more of a normal election than the previous two, which were wave elections. So could we surmise that this election pretty much came down to localized and local issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly the standard sort of regional factors that have mattered in the pre-2014 era of Indian politics, even at the national level, came back into the fore. There's one sort of key factor here, which we don't talk about enough. This is also not normal local anti-incumbency for the BJP. Part of what happened when you had this kind of political centralization, so, the manifesto was actually named Modi Ki Guarantee, right? It was named Modi's Guarantee. Over the last 10 years, there has been extraordinary centralization by Prime Minister Modi, even within his own party, removing powerful local level leaders. Now, what that does is for the rank and file legislators, if I'm somebody who's interested in policy or interested in doing things, the BJP, it doesn't make sense for me to enter formal politics in the BJP. So overnight, after 10 years of BJP rule, and you see this in dominant parties and centralized parties across the world, right? The quality of the local legislator was actually quite poor. So we were talking about anti-incumbency in terms of I'm very unhappy with the economic situation, inflation, but often the voter would say the next thing would be, and also my local legislator, my MP never comes around, never does anything, is corrupt. So the sort of political rank and file, the party worker, the legislator, was sort of a very underperforming legislator, and that is actually a consequence of the political centralization that was happening. So that really also strengthened or increased the level of anti-incumbency the BJP faced in many of these places, particularly in places where they were already in power.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Neelanjan's point earlier. And there was really no central overarching narrative this time, it seems. The Ram Mandir, there was supposed to be, if you look at the timing, it was fairly obvious that it was done, in January, just a few months before the elections were announced. And that was really, the issue around which the BJP's campaign was supposed to crystallize around. But, if you're on the field and even surveys tell you that, that did not really strike the kind of chord that the BJP anticipated. And regarding the national versus regional narrative, again, just to go back to some of my first-hand experience, I was in West Bengal for a bit, and I attended a couple of Mamata Banerjee rallies, and again it was a stark contrast to Prime Minister Modi. Mamata was very much playing up the achievements of her government, the welfare schemes, particularly the ones directed at women. We all know that women voted in large numbers for Mamata. So that narrative of constantly focusing, turning the gaze back on local, regional issues, I think was successfully done not just by Mamata Banerjee, but I believe by other local leaders, regional leaders, non-BJP chief ministers.
If I could take up from the point at which you left off, Ronojoy, you rightly mentioned the importance of the women voter in this election. And there are three constituencies that I would like to talk about in the next few questions. It's one is the women voter, the second is the youth voter, and third is the dynamics of caste that played out in this election. So let's start with the women voter first. How important a role did the women vote play in this election?
So I think it's an extraordinarily important role that female voters are playing in the Indian electorate, and it's not starting with this national election. It's starting with the last several state elections. So we have seen that a certain set of chief ministers and Prime Minister Modi himself are more popular with female voters depending on the region. So in West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee might be more successful with female voters. In parts of North India, Prime Minister Modi is. A lot of people say, oh, this is about welfare delivery, money going into bank accounts for women. Of course, that is there, right? Any kind of local empowerment will have some political impact. But I think there's something more going on, which is that welfare delivery was a way of also branding a political leader to a particular part of the electorate. So when you see what Mamata Banerjee does, it's not just about economic delivery. She also has women's only rallies. She also plays up gender issues when it's important. It's important that she's a powerful female figure as a chief minister in India, where you don't have very many, and now you have none actually besides her, right? So similarly, in a very economically backward North India, the only political exposure that many women who are not really able to go outside the home are having is that of Prime Minister Modi, right? And so it's more than just a simple soap story. It is actually about a very dedicated reach out to the female voter. So we have seen female voter because it's showing up consistently in our public opinion surveys. It's showing up consistently in our ethnographic work. The female voter has emerged as a separate political identity across multiple states for multiple different political actors.
And just to add to what Neelanjan said, again, these are numbers which are easily available. The voter turnout amongst women has actually over the years crept up to where it's almost the same. So that just gives you a sense of the importance of women voter, and actually reaching out to them as a separate constituency rather than earlier thinking they'll probably just go with what her husband or elder brother or father might be. So I think that's dramatically, changed over the last maybe decade or so.
And developing on that, the youth, this election in which we saw a sizable number of first-time voters. India is also a largely young country, and it's going to get younger in demographics. How did the youth voter preference play out here? And I know that the major issues were about some of the major issues were about unemployment, inflation, etc. Was that fundamental in this election? I know it's early in the day and data is still being processed, but what are your inclinations at the moment?
So the problem for the BJP among youth voters actually started earlier than this election. So 2 years ago, when we were traveling in Uttar Pradesh, already you see, and you actually see in the data as well, young men in particular starting to move away from the BJP. And it has to do with the unemployment situation. It has to do with something we don't talk much about in many of these settings, but exam leaks. So one way to prevent hiring into government jobs is to leak the answers to an exam and then cancel the exam so no one gets hired. And so this seems to have been something that has happened many, many times in Uttar Pradesh. So all across North India in particular, where I think the economic pressures are being felt to a much greater degree, and also the demography is much younger, right? They've had higher fertility rates. There you're getting a lot of pressure from the youth voter. Now what I would say about the young voters very quickly is that it's not as if they're beholden to the opposition, right? What has happened is that the story of the BJP was partially dependent on the energy, the support, the mobilization capacity. We in 2014 called them the aspirational voter. Today that aspiration is sort of turned into desperation. And when aspiration turns into desperation, two things happen. Of course, you're not motivated to work for the party anymore, but we also get to a more concerning universe where if a population is disgruntled and angry and it's young, there are law and order concerns and there are safety concerns, and those are issues that North India in particular is going to have to face going forward.
Right, I think unemployment was an issue that was flagged in the pre-poll surveys by CSDS Lokniti, of course, with the caveat that unemployment is always an issue
Exactly.
in India. But as Neelanjan mentioned, there's probably a tipping point, where this turns out into an anti-incumbency vote against the government in power. So I think we did see, again, we are waiting for the data, some of that. But anecdotally, again, when I was in UP particularly, if you just talk to people at the rallies, talk to people on the ground, many of the young voters were saying this one thing, that we don't have jobs, or even if we have jobs, it does not pay us enough to survive. And the second aspect of this was, of course, the BJP did put in place, substantial welfare schemes. You can quibble about whether all of them delivered to the extent that the government, touted it as. But there was also this feeling, and this, you saw that in news reports also when you talk to some of the people on the ground, is that, people were happy with getting their welfare benefits, but there is also this feeling that, if it's sort of demeaning in a sense that you have to live off these payouts. So I think that was there. I think people wanted real, paying jobs. Of course, one will spurn welfare benefits, but the fact that they did not have real jobs along, possibly with, or to replace the benefits, that I think was also something that probably worked particularly amongst the scheduled caste, Dalits, maybe sections of the OBC, etc.
And in every election in India, we find attempts to mobilize the electorate on the basis of religious identity or caste identity as well. This time round, the sense is that the religious identity mobilization, the broader Hindu vote mobilization, didn't play out as hoped for. And on the other hand, the caste affiliations and caste alliances based along caste bases seem to have really worked, especially in places like Uttar Pradesh. What worked this time round?
So, I think actually Uttar Pradesh is a good microcosm to study religious polarization and caste identity. And Uttar Pradesh actually has three different stories. So if you look at the map as to where the BJP lost its seats, it lost them in three clusters. It lost them in the western zone, where the Jat population is numerous and where there are large Muslim populations, particularly around Saharanpur and so on and so forth. And this happened partially because of Muslim consolidation behind the Congress and the Samajwadi Party. Remember that the last couple of times they've contested separately, right? So this time that worked for them. But also anger among the Jat community based on rural distress and farmer distress, right? So those farmers' protests really sort of coming to the fore. Then there was a section as we start moving eastward, which is what we call the Yadav belt, Itawa and all of these. Now, the BJP had made a lot of ground in these places, not necessarily among the Yadavs. They had switched over some Yadavs, but they had counter-mobilized. Basically, everybody who was not Yadav was voting with the BJP against the dominant Yadavs. Now, what has happened is, first of all, you've now had 10 years of BJP rule, and you've had, 7 years of Yogi Adityanath rule. So we are no longer in Yadav domination, we're now in Thakur domination. So many of the old sort of Yadav, now perhaps some people are actually yearning back for Yadav dominance. Now they've seen Thakur dominance. It'll go back and forth. So without the ability of the BJP to generate that kind of counter-mobilization behind national issues, and the ability of the Samajwadi Party and the Congress to make tactical caste alliances with the Yadavs in this belt, there in the Yadav belt, again, you saw a huge surge of support for Samajwadi Party in particular. Finally, and this is the most important story, going eastward from Lucknow, what had happened was the BJP had actually mobilized and consolidated two very big caste communities. The Pasi community, a Dalit community, not the Jatavs who we associate with Mayawati, but they were traditional Congress voters who had all sort of shifted towards the BJP. And the second was the Kurmis, right? Mm-hmm. So, in fact, the BJP often was in alliance with Apna Dal, right, which is a Kurmi party. And it generated a lot of, consolidation and support among the Kurmis. That actually started breaking apart 2 years ago in the state election. So, in a district like Barabanki, which is a Kurmi-dominated district, actually the BJP loses a majority of the assembly seats. So that erosion, moving Lucknow eastward, continued in this election. Some of the Samajwadi Party and Congress reconsolidation of the Pasi community and reconsolidation of the Kurmi community. And so much so that as we moved eastward, even in Varanasi, right, where Prime Minister Modi is competing, his victory margin drops like fourfold or something, right? It's so the lack of performance for the BJP moving eastward because of the inability to put these caste coalitions together like it once did was starting to show its teeth 2 years ago, and it's now become a full-blown crisis for the BJP.
And one might add, the Samajwadi Party was quite smart in its its ticket allocation. In fact, it gave very few tickets to Yadavs this time. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but beyond the immediate family,
only 4 or 5 Yadavs, right?
The immediate family of Akhilesh Yadav, his brother, wife, etc. I think beyond 4 or 5, all the tickets were quite evenly distributed among other OBCs, Dalits, etc. And I think that really worked, because even in Ayodhya, where the Ram temple is located, the BJP lost. So that gives you a sense of not just the discontent in UP, but how smartly the Samajwadi Party played its game. And the second issue one needs to flag is the precipitous decline of the Bahujan Samaj Party, or the BSP. Neelanjan mentioned Mayawati. So they've been consistently declining over the last few elections, and that space earlier had largely been filled by the BJP. But I think this time the Samajwadi Party, for various reasons, managed to sort of claw back, as well as the Congress. So I think the Jatav vote, which is a large constituency which traditionally used to go with Mayawati, now have realized that they're kind of wasting their vote if they vote for Mayawati and BSP. So that, I think, has instead of going to the BJP this time, I think possibly went to the both the SP and in parts to the Congress.
And just a quick thing to add there, our assumption was that as the BSP declines, the Jatavs would go to the BJP, right? And we'd seen that. I think what people didn't internalize was that those who already were to shift to the BJP and to Prime Minister Modi had already done so in 2019 and 2 years ago in the state election. And what was left were people who were more likely to shift to the Samajwadi Party. So part of the story of the East in particular, which is not a non-Jatav vote, is that there were still a lot of BSP voters, but they were not necessarily willing to shift to the BJP. They were perfectly happy shifting to the Samajwadi Party and the Congress. And so there, where you have sort of less of an easy transfer between the BSP and the BJP, actually the reservoir of votes with the BSP shrinking, actually significantly helped the Samajwadi Party and the Congress Party.
And this issue of vote transfer, this is a tricky thing to second guess before the elections, right? Previously, when the Samajwadi Party and the BSP tied up, the BSP vote didn't necessarily transfer to the Samajwadi, but this time we've seen it transfer. So this is a very interesting dimension to this. Now, moving beyond Uttar Pradesh, as the discussion has already gone in this direction, but we know that there are very strong regional dimensions. In the sense, this is not just one election; this is multiple elections occurring within a country. Turning towards the south, for instance, now there was a very intense effort on the part of the BJP to cultivate the south. Now, this worked in some extent in Karnataka, etc. But if we look at Tamil Nadu, for instance, a state that a lot was invested by Prime Minister Modi himself and the BJP, and we look at Kerala, where they wanted to open their account for various reasons. In Kerala, the BJP won one seat. In Tamil Nadu, they've actually it's their ally who's won a seat. But indications are that their vote share has gone up somewhat. It's about 11%. How do you assess the BJP's potential outreach towards the south? Was it politically shrewd? Are they playing a longer term game? How do you see this playing out?
I mean, so they are definitely playing a longer term game. I mean, the way that we think about this is that there are 6 states in India in the north: Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, and the west, north and west, which gave the BJP 70% of its seats in 2014 and 60% of its seats in 2019. Extreme regional concentration and consolidation. In fact, this time the BJP fell apart in a number of these states. And one positive story for the BJP in an election that's been relatively negative is that without breaking into many of these new regional areas and territories, the BJP would have actually done significantly worse, right? So we know that not the South, the BJP swept Orissa this time, which was a big event. In Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, the BJP already had a presence on the backs of severe anti-incumbency against YSR Congress and Jagan Reddy, and allying with TDP and Chandrababu Naidu, the BJP got a few seats. In Telangana, it's a funny story. It's not that the BJP broke further into Telangana, it's that the traditional, sort of strong regional party with the formerly TRS, now BRS, under KCR, kind of collapsed. And so all of that vote share got shifted to Congress and BJP. So actually both Congress and BJP did better there, right? But it's true that in these new states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, where the BJP was hoping to open its account, it did slightly open its account in Kerala, I suppose, but it didn't manifest the way that they were hoping. So, all in all, getting some of these seats in the South did prevent a bigger disaster for the BJP, where the BJP wouldn't even be able to form government. It does mean that regional concentration that we once associated with the BJP in 2014 and 2019 will definitely break in this election when we look at the distribution of seats. Is it a long-term strategy? Well, probably not, just simply because if this is going to be the distribution of BJP seats and this is going to have to be how it fights elections, it's not going to be a dominant party for very long, right? So ultimately, the BJP stays a dominant party when it wins 90% of the seats in the Hindi belt and it sweeps those 6 states that I talked about. It didn't do so this time, and it faced trouble.
Yes, the story of the South, was one of the sort of central stories heading into the elections because of the intense focus that Prime Minister Modi, in particular, put on the South. Several trips to Tamil Nadu, Kerala, etc. And if you look at the results, if I'm not wrong, the BJP actually won exactly the same number of seats, I think 29, that it won this time compared to 2019. The mix was different. In Karnataka, they actually dropped from 25 out to I think 17, if I'm not wrong. And the opening its account in Kerala was significant. I think they were aiming for 1 or 2 seats. They did get 1 in Thrissur. Tamil Nadu, yeah, they're definitely playing a long game because they're trying to sort of fill in the vacuum, or the so-called vacuum being left by the slow decline of the AIADMK. So to that extent, I think the BJP was successful. It did increase, as you rightly mentioned, the vote share to 11, but it did not on its own win a seat. One of its allies did. And, Neelanjan talked about the Andhra and the Telangana story. So I think the BJP, did not do definitely as well as they anticipated, but so there's sort of green shoots for them in a region where they have traditionally never done well.
And West Bengal was another state that the BJP invested heavily, and in fact the exit polls were sort of predicting a much larger haul for the BJP there. What happened? How did the TMC pull it back?
Okay, well, first thing, the exit polls, Ronojoy and I were talking earlier. Some of the constituencies they named, constituencies all of us know well in the middle of South Calcutta, like Jadavpur and Kolkata Dokhin. If the TMC loses those seats, they're not winning a single seat in Bengal. These have been voting for Mamata even during CPM times. The exit polls were sort of very peculiar. I actually have a slightly contrarian view on this, which is the BJP won 12 seats. That's a very good result for the BJP. Honestly, the BJP, based on how trends were looking for those of us on the ground, looked like it could be a single-digit party out of 42, right? It just sort of surged just back ahead in seats like Kathi and this and that. So they were...
There were some close margins.
There were some close margins, and they did just enough to win a few of these seats. So the spatial demography of West Bengal vis-a-vis politics is the southern part of the state has almost always voted with Mamata and the TMC and continued to do so in this election. The northern part of the state is the one where the BJP broke into in a very big way in 2019, it continued those successes actually in 2021 in the wherever it won, right? And it held on to those seats in this election, albeit with greater challenges, right? So it didn't quite. So again, it kind of surged ahead at the end. Where the BJP has lost some ground is in the western part of the state, right? Where it had engaged in a certain kind of consolidation among the Kurmi community. We don't typically talk about caste politics in Bengal, but
So
it did
this is
actually.
the Jungle Mahal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that also had a lot to do with the leader who the BJP was working with at the time, Dilip Ghosh. And so, they had actually built a reasonable base there. That has completely fallen apart. Organizationally, they have fallen up. The BJP has fallen apart in that region, even with getting, bringing a new leader who is from that region. And the TMC has strengthened its links in that region. So when we look at what happened in West Bengal, to me, as somebody who spent a little bit of time, and I think Ronojoy spent more time in West Bengal, there was very little doubt in my mind that BJP was going to lose seats. The only question was how low it was going to go. And there was very little doubt about where it was going to lose seats. The question was how many seats, particularly in the western part of the state. So it pulled back from a bigger disaster. That's sort of my take on what happened in West Bengal.
Yes, just to add, when the exit poll results came out, a lot of the, I was there, as I said, during the campaign. A lot of people were absolutely shocked, I was getting, sort of text messages, phone calls from, journalists, people who had been sort of mapping the districts, saying that this is impossible. They were all quite certain that the BJP would drop. How much they would drop by, there was a bit of a debate. Some were saying 5, some were saying 6, some were saying 10. So eventually, I think, as Neelanjan mentioned, the BJP probably did not do as badly. It sort of pulled through with 12. But in the end, I think the larger story, as I was mentioning, Mamata consistently made an effort to make it a regional or a local election, and to sort of counter the national narrative, and I think that worked. But also my sense is that the BJP local organization is still quite weak and overly dependent on Prime Minister Modi's cabinet. So this was one state where I think I was reading somewhere, Prime Minister Modi went around 25 times, possibly the highest number of times to any state. And so there was an over-reliance, and that Modi will deliver, Modi ki guarantee in some ways, and that did not just work. And I think there was a certain degree, if not complacency, in the organizational setup that it'll somehow magically happen. So they had quite a few weak candidates. You mentioned Jadavpur. Jadavpur was a no-win situation for the BJP.
I mean, the BJP was going to win that seat anyway, but they also didn't even try.
Yeah, so this was a seat
shocking when the exit poll said you would.
So this was a seat where Mamata Banerjee actually first won in '84. Was giantly defeating Somnath Chatterjee. So those were seats. They had put up very weak candidates with no local roots. Again, probably just depending on the the Modi persona. So I think that definitely contributed in a big way to the results in West Bengal.
And what do you think about Audhir? So for those, we have two Bengalis on the other thing. So the Congress will now look very different going forward, right? The big leader that we associate with the Congress party lost in Baharampur. But Isha Khan Chaudhary, and a lot of us picked this up, in Malda Dokhin swept. So we might be seeing it. I don't think the Congress is disappearing, but we might be seeing a sort of a changing of the guard in the Congress party in West Bengal.
Right, yeah, that's the hazard of having two Bengalis on the show. But Baharampur, where Adit Chaudhary, who was the leader, heading the sort of Congress in Parliament, the leader of the opposition, not technically, but leader of the Congress Legislative Party, he's won, I think, 5 times from Baharampur, if I'm not wrong, or even more. And I actually I was in Baharampur constituency during my travels in West Bengal, and the sense that I got there was Yusuf Pathan, the former India cricketer, was an interesting choice. Of course, not from Bengal, got from Gujarat, and was kind of smart in a way. He seemed to have connected in a big way with, we're talking about the youth voters, and I talked to a lot of younger voters. I was there, and they were all saying that Audhir's, and this is also a predominantly, where it's a large Muslim population, so these constituencies. So there were very young, Muslim voters telling me that Audhir's done things before, but we haven't seen him for the last, 5 years or so. And Yusuf Pathan seems to be, a viable alternative. And to give Yusuf Pathan credit, he campaigned, very strongly in that area, and I think that bore results.
Yeah. I think this also speaks to something we started off with as well, that in this election, seat selection seems to be really an important issue in itself as well. People are judging their candidates. There's no Modi wave which is taking over, or any party wave that's dominated. And I deliberately left the question for West Bengal to the end, sensing there are two Bengalis in the studio with me. But I want to end the podcast on a note of looking ahead and be a bit speculative in this way. Now, coalition governments are not new to India, right? In fact, India has gone back to the default setting of coalitions, at least since the 1990s. And coalition governments are not necessarily bad. There's a lot of literature on this issue about checks and balances, etc. But the coalition government is something new to Prime Minister Modi and the new iteration of the BJP party. This coalition government will also be formed with two major allies, the TDP and the JDU, both of whom have ditched the BJP before. How hard is the bargaining going to be, and what are the implications of this bargaining for the coalition looking ahead?
I mean, so we are in uncharted territory. So I think everything that any of us say is pure speculation. The reason why we're in uncharted territory is that the version of Prime Minister Modi that we have known up to this point, both as Chief Minister in Gujarat and as a Prime Minister for the last 10 years, is one who always has had significant majorities, has engaged in very significant political centralization, and has branded politics around his own image, his sort of personalization of politics. So what does a person like this do when you now have to engage in coalition politics? My imagination is that in the short term at least, Prime Minister Modi is not looking to change very much, because it's the only way in which he knows how to govern. Brand Modi is about political centralization. It is about decisive leadership. It is not about coalition politics and compromise. So you will have hard bargaining. There will be stormy in the very beginning. But I do suspect that there are two things worth thinking about. So first, just a very nerdy sort of numbers thing. The NDA has 290 to 295 seats when all is said and done. The TDP, Chandrababu Naidu, JDU, Nitish Kumar together have 28 seats. So just getting and engineering a few defections from the India alliance or sort of unaligned party members into NDA would be enough to even prevent a government collapse, even if both of them defect. I don't think both of them will defect, at least immediately, because Chandrababu Naidu's bigger opponent right now is Jagan Reddy. So in the short term, the bargaining between Chandrababu Naidu and Prime Minister Modi is all about allowing Chandrababu Naidu to consolidate power in his home state of Andhra Pradesh. So I think that in the short term, that can be addressed. Nitish Kumar, all bets are off. Nobody can ever pretend to know what he will do next. So he could very much leave and come back and leave and come back 5 times before this government is done. So I think that's sort of what's happening with the bargaining. But I want to take a position which I think is a controversial position. People are saying, well, the reality of the numbers is that coalition partners will have to exact their pound of flesh, right? Extract their pound of flesh. I think that's true, but I think we forget that what we know of the kind of political centralization that Prime Minister Modi has undertaken is that they have centralized power even when it wasn't electorally beneficial. They did it in Bihar in 2015, not projecting Sushil Modi. They have diminished the roles of Shivraj Singh Chauhan and Raman Singh, who were very, very popular chief ministers, in order to consolidate around Prime Minister Modi. So any kind of show of weakness of negotiating with coalition partners is also a show of weakness within the party. It also shows that you're going to have to start negotiating within the BJP. And Modi has worked so hard to consolidate power within the BJP and shunt out leaders he doesn't like. So you have to understand that for him it is a huge loss of face if he has to start bargaining, because he's going to have to start bargaining with everybody. And Prime Minister Modi has never had to do that.
Yes, I think Neelanjan's covered all the bases really. But I just want to add that both Nitish Kumar and Chandrababu Naidu to just use a Hindi phrase, the Purana Khiladi, veteran hands. They've been there from the Vajpayee era. And as Neelanjan mentioned, they've been in, out, So they know the coalition game very well, but Prime Minister Modi and the current avatar of the BJP does not. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing. Of course, both Naidu and Nitish Kumar will be very much interested in extracting as much as they can for the respective states as well as for their parties. We know that Naidu was in jail on corruption charges, so he also has an interest in sort of keeping the agencies out, which are of course in under the centre. So there are all these factors there. So it will be interesting times. But as Neelanjan mentioned, the numbers are such that the BJP could do with at least one of them. If deserts, they can still manage. It's not one of those touch and go situations where they can directly sort of sink the government. So that the BJP has that sort of stability or fallback. But again, as Neelanjan mentioned, I think very much uncharted territory, and we'll see. It'll be in a realm of speculation if we try to predict which way it will go.
Neelanjan, you mentioned brand Modi a couple of times actually in your answer. So I'm going to end the discussion with that, coming back to that question. How has brand Modi emerged out of this election?
So look, brand Modi is obviously a bit bruised because brand Modi isn't just about how popular Prime Minister Modi is. He's very popular still, by the way. It is also about his ability to sweep elections, which has obviously not happened. I think one thing that we have learned about the Indian electorate is that you can like somebody but still not vote for them. Indira Gandhi also faced that. Indira Gandhi remained very popular until the very end, right? It's just that in 77...
In fact, it was her popularity that got Rajiv Gandhi
Yes.
back with such a resounding mandate.
Exactly.
The sympathy vote, yeah.
And so, but even in 77, she would have still been a very popular leader, but she had to be punished, right? And so, I think Prime Minister Modi and Amit Shah will see that, right? They can build on the fact that Modi is still extremely popular. But it's I mentioned in my previous answer, the maintenance of brand Modi is the sole preoccupation of this group. Modi ki guarantee. Modi speaking in the third person in rallies, right? Modi making sure that what the voter sees is Prime Minister Modi, right? It's a very important part of how this version of the BJP is maintained. If brand Modi is not maintained, then this version of the BJP cannot exist. Then this version of the BJP cannot form government. I want to sort of end with this sort of one thought that normally when alliance talks happen, a lot of it is behind closed doors. You quietly go to the president or the governor, depending on state and election, you form your government. This time, within a few hours, the alliance was forced to say that we are all supporting Modi. Modi will be our prime minister. So even in the moment of very ugly coalition negotiations, it is about Modi. It is not about the alliance. It is not about the BJP. It is not about the NDA. This government, this version of the government, cannot survive unless brand Modi is maintained.
Yeah, just to add that brand Modi is definitely somewhat diminished. Of course, still remains extremely popular, but to use a phrase used by one of the newspapers, he's been cut down somewhat to size. And internally, I think there will be a churn. Once when you have a leader who's supreme, who's extremely popular, who brooks no opposition, people fall in line. But as soon, and this is sort of human dynamics. As soon as you see someone slip, the halo dim somewhat, there will be a churn within the party. There will be some voices which were silent before speaking up. So I think we're going to see some of that within the party. The party is not as monolithic as or as disciplined that it's made out to be. There are regional factions. There are the factor of whom the RSS or the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh is backing or not backing. So there are all these factors, and I think some of these will come into play, I assume, over the next 5 years because of the result that we have seen this in 2024.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today and sharing your insights. I warn you in advance, we will call on both of you again to share more of your views in the coming weeks, because it's interesting times and interesting political permutations will be playing out. So thank you, Neelanjan. Thank you, Ronojoy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at ices.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates through social media. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram. South Asia Chat is also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us today.